A big step closer to a new government for Britain. The Liberal Democrats are back in talks with the Conservatives. The Labour team that tried to do an alternative deal that would keep them in power. Hours of talks, but no agreement. Clegg the Kingmaker. It's his call, and all day he's under pressure to make up his mind.
I'm as impatient as anybody else to get on with this, to resolve matters one way or another.
The Tory team calls for an end to the uncertainty about who governs Britain. They want David Cameron in number 10, and soon.
It is now, I believe, decision time for the Liberal Democrats, and I hope they make the right decision that will give this country the strong, stable government that it badly needs.
We'll be asking where all this leaves the Labour Party.
Also on tonight's programme, in the city, the markets watch and wait, hoping for a swift end to the uncertainty. And the England manager names his provisional squad for the World Cup. Were there any surprises?
On BBC London, we ask what a Conservative Lib Dem coalition would mean for the capital. And behind the cameras, why the media coverage at Westminster has created a following of its own.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC's News at 6. We're in Downing Street, where tonight it seems that 5 days after polling day, Britain may finally be about to get a new government. It's becoming increasingly clear that the Labour Party has given up hope of doing a deal with the Liberal Democrats. Nick Clegg, the Liberal Democrat leader, has had another face-to-face meeting with David Cameron, and his team are thought to be finalising an agreement with the Conservatives. First tonight, our deputy political editor, James Landale, on the parties, the leaders and the negotiations that could be about to see a new man in number 10.
Nick Clegg is fast running out of road. For days he's kept his options open, but now he must make his choice. A choice that will determine the fate of his party, but more importantly, the future of our government.
The discussions between the political parties have now reached a critical and final phase. I'm as impatient as anybody else to get on with this, to resolve matters one way or another. My parliamentary party was up into the small hours yet again discussing things. We will act as ever responsibly.
But will that mean making this man Prime Minister? David Cameron's biding his time, making clear to the Lib Dems that he's made his final offer.
My own members of Parliament have shown that they're prepared to put aside party interest in the national interest by agreeing to a referendum on alternative vote. So it is now, I believe, decision time for the Liberal Democrats, and I hope they make the right decision that will give this country the strong, stable government that it badly needs.
But the current government wanted their say first. Labour's negotiators, headed by Lord Mandelson, spent 3 hours this morning with the Lib Dems to try to forge a deal between their parties. And afterwards, one of their team said the talks have been positive.
There are many points of agreement. There are obviously further issues to be worked through, and I hope those talks will continue. But I thought there was a good atmosphere and a good constructive basis for our discussion.
But as the day wore on, Labour MPs began to voice in public what many ministers felt in private, that a Lib-Lab deal was unworkable.
I'm very reluctant to see a Labour-Lib deal. I would prefer to see a Tory, Conservative and Lib Dem deal.
I want to see what's best, not only for the country, but also for the long-term prospects of the Labour Party. And I'm not convinced that a shaky, dodgy coalition with our opponents, in this case the Liberal Democrats, would be in the long-term interests of the Labour Party.
We need decisions now!
As the country faced a 5th day of uncertainty, public impatience and anger began to show as people gathered on the lawns outside Parliament.
As a Labour voter, I want Parliament to sit and I want the discussions to go on in open.
Parliament will sit and Parliament will vote, and it's all about whether you've got a majority.
Deals.
Meanwhile, David Cameron was in the Commons to meet his MPs and reassure some who fear he's given the Lib Dems too much on voting reform. Well, up the road this afternoon, his negotiating team began talking to the Lib Dems once again.
As you know, we believe very strongly that there should be a government with a strong and secure majority in the House of Commons, and of course with an elected Prime Minister. We remain very, very firmly of that view. We set out our proposals to achieve that yesterday, and we have come here to hear the Liberal Democrat response.
The Prime Minister returned to Downing Street from the Commons, perhaps for the last time. Ministers then joined him, and there were few smiles. This evening, a close ally of Mr Brown appeared ready to concede defeat, accepting that the talks between Labour and the Lib Dems were over, and that Mr Brown may be preparing to leave Downing Street. So all eyes still on the talks between the Lib Dem and Conservative negotiators in Whitehall. The ball is still in the Lib Dems' court. Their MPs, lords and party managers will be meeting here shortly, and they've a big choice. Do they go into coalition with the Conservatives, or do they let the Tories go it alone? James Landau, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, with me now is the BBC's political editor, Nick Robinson. Nick, every time I check, there seems to be a new twist or turn in this story. What do you make of it all?
Well, the Prime Minister is now preparing to resign, I'm told. He is preparing to go to the palace. He's inside Downing Street now with his wife, Sarah. He is with some of his closest allies and aides of recent times, with Peter Mandelson, with Ed Balls, with Ed Miliband, Douglas Alexander, Sue Nye, who people may remember from that conversation in the back of the car he referred to, with Alistair Campbell, who once worked closely with Tony Blair. I'm told in the last few minutes he's spoken to Tony Blair. It is a moment, of course, not just when he will leave Downing Street, but when New Labour will leave Downing Street and will leave power. The end, if it comes, of an extraordinary era in British politics and the birth of a new one. If and when he leaves Downing Street, we will then see a sequence of events in which David Cameron will be called to the palace to see Her Majesty the Queen be asked to form a new government.
As you've hinted there, if a deal goes through, this is a huge moment. It changes the face of British politics, doesn't it?
It does, not just because we're seeing a transition that we've not seen for 3 decades, George. It is 3 decades since a Conservative walked into Downing Street ejecting a Labour government. Margaret Thatcher, of course, that was in 1979. It is 7 decades since we saw a coalition government. 70 years, too, since we saw a Liberal around the seat, around the cabinet table. These are dramatic changes in British politics. We'll reshape it all. There may be some Liberal Democrats tonight who are asked to sign this off who simply can't stomach it and would rather join another party or resign or go independent. We will see big changes in the next few months to come. There's not just in the faces, not just in the policies, but the sort of politics that we've had for many years.
All right, Nick, for the moment, thank you very much. I want to take you round the corner now to the Cabinet Office. Carol Walker is there. That's where the negotiations between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives have been taking place. Carol, what can you tell us?
Well, I've heard just in the last few minutes, George, that the negotiators believe that they are moving towards a deal. They're not there yet, but they are hoping to achieve a deal that would be a coalition, so you would get Liberal Democrats around the cabinet table with Conservatives, and it would be for a fixed term, perhaps 3 to 4 years. Now, going into these negotiations, the Conservatives were making it clear that as far as electoral reform is concerned, their offer of a referendum on a change to the voting system was as far as they were prepared to go. But what is happening now is they are continuing those talks to try to thrash out an arrangement that it will be acceptable to their own parties. There's going to be meetings of the Conservative MPs, a series of meetings on the Liberal Democrat side. What we're waiting to hear now is whether those two negotiating teams can come back and tell us that they have secured that deal, a deal that would lead to a coalition government with David Cameron in Downing Street.
OK, Carol, thank you very much. Let's go over now to the Labour headquarters, Labour Party headquarters, and talk to our correspondent there, Ian Watson. Ian, is there a sense of, finality there?
I think there is. The Labour's National Executive Committee, the ruling body of the Labour Party, have been meeting here all afternoon. That meeting broke up in the past half hour or so. I've been speaking to some of the members who've left this building, and I think, in effect, what happened was the last rites were read on this idea of a progressive alliance, as it's been called, with the Liberal Democrats. The meeting was specifically called to discuss any elements of a deal with the Liberal Democrats, and I was told by a very senior member of that committee that, in truth, no deal was there to be done. Now, Gordon Brown is a member of this committee, but he didn't take part personally. He telephoned the committee and discussed progress. People said they were in relatively good spirits, but now they meet again next week to draw up the timetable to replace Gordon Brown as Labour leader, and they say they now want a swift replacement for Gordon Brown now that no deal with the Liberal Democrats is on the table.
OK, Ian, thank you very much. Well, right at the centre of the last few days of negotiations was the issue of electoral reform. In other words, what system we use to select our governments. Up till now, elections to the Westminster Parliament have been based on first past the post, simply winning the largest number of votes in a constituency. But the Liberal Democrats have always said that's unfair. So what are the other options, and what would they mean for future elections? Rita Chakrabarti reports.
Last Thursday could be the final Westminster election where you put an X in the box. First past the post could be on the way out. The Lib Dems' demands for a change to the voting system
and extensive fundamental political reform
have led to promises from the other parties.
Reform is urgently needed to help restore trust, and that reform must include the electoral system.
Only such a progressive government could meet the demand for political and electoral change which the British people made last Thursday.
Both Labour and the Tories have offered the Lib Dems a referendum on the alternative vote. Here voters rank candidates in order of preference. They're elected if they get more than half the votes. If no one does, the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated and second choice is distributed to the remaining candidates. It's emerged Labour might offer the Lib Dems more. That could be the Alternative Vote Plus, which is the same as the Alternative Vote, except there's a second vote at a regional level, either for a party or for a candidate from a party list. This was proposed by a commission set up by Labour in 1997 with Lib Dem support, but its recommendations were quietly dropped. But what the Lib Dems would really like is the single transferable vote. Voters again rank their candidates in order of preference, but each constituency has several seats. If a candidate wins a certain number of votes, they get elected. Any remaining votes for them get distributed to other candidates according to voters' choices. But not everyone is happy.
What we have now with a hung parliament is exactly what would happen under almost any proportional electoral system. After every election, the leader of the Liberal Democrats would not only be given the power to appoint the new Prime Minister, he would be given, as has happened on this occasion, a veto over who leads the main parties.
Many Tories are also against change, but they don't want to rock the boat at this delicate time. It means the Lib Dems are close to achieving the prize they've wanted for so long, a voting system that gives them more seats. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News, Westminster.
Now, if a deal between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives does go ahead, that would reflect the result in England, where the Conservatives won the most votes and seats. But in Wales, Labour were comfortably the largest party, while in Scotland, the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats together got barely a fifth of the available seats, the Tories winning just one. Lorna Gordon reports on how such a deal might be seen in Scotland.
Dumfriesshire, Clydesdale and Tweeddale. It's a large rural constituency peppered with small market towns. The deals are still being done to decide who'll be Britain's next Prime Minister. But if it ends up being David Cameron, would he go down well with voters here in what is still Scotland's only Conservative seat at Westminster?
No, it'll be fine. We'll be fine.
Of all the seats that we've got, one seat, I mean, you shouldn't have any say in Scottish politics at all.
I don't think it's a problem for the Scots, really, no.
Or for David Cameron?
No.
I don't think the Tories have got any right to govern Scotland at any time unless they have a mandate here, and I don't think they do. I don't think they have a mandate here.
And that may be one of the Conservatives' main challenges if they do gain power at Westminster. The other parties here in Scotland, like the SNP, may question the Tories' right to make decisions affecting Scotland, question their right to govern. The Nationalists would instead have liked to have seen what they called a rainbow alliance involving their party, Labour and Plaid.
We take our marching orders from Scotland. Scotland voted 85% against having a Tory government. That's clearly influential in our positioning in the Parliament, but we'll judge things in the interests of Scotland.
Of course, a lot of decisions about Scotland are now made here at the Scottish Parliament, and the Tories say this makes a difference.
Our mandate is across the whole of the United Kingdom. We've been very clear that we won't introduce any Scotland-only legislation that doesn't command the support of others. And of course, the big difference between the 1980s, 1990s is we have the Scottish Parliament, which was responsible for the devolved matters.
David Cameron has said that on taking office he'll pursue what he calls a mutual respect agenda. This is uncharted territory for the Union, but the Conservatives on the verge of power insist they can govern the whole of the United Kingdom. Lorna Gordon, BBC News, Moffat.
So what do people in the Tory heartlands of southern England think of a potential Conservative Liberal Democrat alliance? Mark Easton went to Henley-on-Thames in Oxfordshire to hear views from there.
Middle England fears a political stitch-up might stitch up Middle England. There is a simmering anger behind Henley's stiff upper lip, chocolate box England, with a bitter taste in its mouth.
Viewed from here, the prospect of a Labour-dominated government reliant on Scots, Welsh and Northern Irish MPs to push through English cuts, perhaps, seems unfair. After all, in England, the Conservatives have a clear majority.
I feel very angry about it all at the moment, but I have no idea what way it's going to go. I couldn't tell you.
How would you feel about Scottish, Irish and Welsh MPs deciding on English matters?
Oh, I hate that. I really... We do have it now, don't we, to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well, it could be the price for their support.
Truly hate it.
We're now going to be influenced perhaps by the Scottish and the Irish. And it gets to the stage whereby how much choice do we as a voter or, you know, any political party have as an English person?
If it goes ahead, I foresee a terrible time in which England will continue to suffer.
If the Lib Lab alliance were to go ahead, policies on English hospitals, police, transport and schools may be decided by the votes of Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish politicians. What's more, the guarantee of political support may require cash for their parts of the UK, which could mean bigger cuts in England.
Scotland is essentially Labour, England is essentially Conservative, and it just makes the whole thing rather difficult. As for the coalition that you're talking about, I don't think it will happen. It'll be too difficult to organise, I should imagine, so it won't happen.
Whatever deal is done, the political mathematics have already stirred up those who argue England is getting a raw deal.
They're livid, absolutely livid. They consider that the possible situation of a minority government of England is unendurable. If you only have to look at the blogosphere to know that it's absolutely seething with rage.
The politics appear to have moved away from a rainbow alliance with vital Celtic hues, and that may in part be because Middle England threatened to colour up with indignation. Mark Easton, BBC News, Henley-on-Thames.
Well, that's all for now. If there are any developments, we'll bring them straight to you. But now it's back to Fiona in the studio.
George, thanks very much. Well, the markets have been watching nervously to find out who will be Prime Minister. There are still major concerns over the size of the UK's deficit, which the European Commission has predicted will be the biggest in the EU by the end of the year. As our chief economics correspondent Hugh Pym reports, the city wants to know which of the parties plans to tackle it and how.
The financial markets and business are as hopeful as anyone that the occupancy of number 10 will be settled soon, but some are tired of waiting.
Well, the economy is in a very fragile state, not just because of the European Union issues, but because of the UK position. Business growth is the vital for recovery, and all of the political discussions are halting the ability of any new government, whoever it is, to really tackle the economy, tackle the deficit and get business growing again, and that's critical.
This morning, workers arrived in the City of London, trying to take on board the latest twists and turns in the political drama. For most of them, the key question is, will a stable government emerge ready to take painful decisions on tax and spending? Prices of leading shares fell early on as political uncertainty lingered and dealers tried to work out what it meant for the economy.
The market's hope is that we get a strong government that can put in place a budget and start to take action on the deficit. The market's fear is that we can't get that strong government and that we're going to be in a very uncertain period with a lot of fragility, and it won't be possible to take the strong action that's needed to reduce the budget deficit.
The government bond price reflects the market view. Early on Friday, as votes were still being counted, there was a sharp drop with worries about the hung parliament. On Monday, the price was steady but fell after Gordon Brown's announcement. Today, prices rose as dealers sensed Mr Clegg would do a deal with the Conservatives. Britain needs foreign investors to fund a chunk of government borrowing over the next few years, so how they regard the UK is important. And right now they're getting increasingly confused about the state of play here.
Because of the problems in Europe, that's served to deflect attention away from the pressing economic problems that we're facing here in the UK. And now I think the focus is shifting back. There's an immediate concern about forming a government, but there's a broader concern about the ability of the government to bring down the budget deficit, to take the painful measures which are required.
Share prices pared back some of their losses after reports that a deal was imminent. But the message from the markets is clear. The new government must say the right things about tackling the deficit, and time is of the essence. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
And the time is 6:20. Our top story tonight. Labour says its talks with the Liberal Democrats are over as the Conservatives await a response to their latest offer. Coming up, the provisional England squad is announced for the World Cup, and Capello tempts at least one player out of retirement.
Later on BBC London, the traffic camera that's netting nearly £1 million a month in fines. And Manager of the Year Roy Hodgson prepares his Fulham side for the biggest night in the club's history. We'll have a special report from Hamburg.
The US Congress has begun its first hearing into the massive oil spill spreading virtually unchecked across the Gulf of Mexico. Among those appearing before the Senate committee are officials from BP, which is desperately trying to stem the flow of oil following last month's explosion at the Deepwater Horizon rig. Let's speak to our North America editor, Mark Mardell. Mark, what sort of reception are BP getting?
It's going through a fairly tough but technical sort of grilling, and they're not the only company there. There are a couple of their subcontractors there as well. And there's a bit of a blame game going on, with BP saying it's one bit of equipment that probably failed, and the other companies saying, well, no, it's not because of that bit of equipment, it's because BP gave orders not to put a cement plug into the thing in the first place. So it's a bit of a blame game. It hasn't got really very, very heated, but they're trying to get down to the nitty-gritty of what went wrong.
And Mark, is there any indication that BP are going to be able to stem this flow of oil anytime soon?
Well, who knows? I mean, the oil slick is sitting there and it's growing the whole time as more oil spews into it. The latest plan is to literally fire rubbish into the hole. They're talking about things like golf balls, human hair, shredded tyres, literally rubbish, to just block up the hole. It's given the sort of the complex engineering projects we've had over the past few days and weeks, it sounds very low-tech, but maybe reassuringly so. Maybe it'll work.
Let's hope so. Mark Mardell in Washington, thank you. The union representing British Airways cabin crew says industrial action can still be avoided if the management is willing to negotiate meaningfully over the airline's cost-cutting plans. The first of 20 days of strikes is due to begin next week and could affect thousands of passengers. But BA is refusing to back down and says it will lease planes to try to minimise the impact of the strikes. The ash cloud is causing more disruption to air travel, with 5 Moroccan airports closed for the first time since the volcano in Iceland began erupting in March. Airports in the Canary Islands and southern Spain have also been closed. The England manager, Fabio Capello, has named his provisional squad for the World Cup next month. As expected, he's persuaded the Liverpool defender, Jamie Carragher, to come out of international retirement. Capello also said he would postpone launching a controversial website which would have rated his players' performance in South Africa. Here's our sports correspondent, Dan Rowan.
The build-up has begun, and today the World Cup seemed that bit closer as England took another important step in their preparations for the tournament. Fabio Capello is the man on whom the nation's hopes rest in South Africa, and his 30-man preliminary squad contains plenty of surprises. The uncapped Adam Johnson and Michael Dawson are both rewarded for fine seasons with Manchester City and Spurs respectively. Elsewhere, there are injury worries over Gareth Barry, Rio Ferdinand, Ledley King and Wayne Rooney. But Capello feels he has no choice but to take a gamble.
Some players are really important because know very well my style, know what I ask them. It's one of the decisions that I take always in my career.
Out of the wilderness comes Jamie Carragher. Capello has tempted the Liverpool defender from international retirement.
This is Scholes!
But the Italian was less successful with Manchester United's Paul Scholes.
He said no, he preferred to stay with the family. I tried, yes.
Capello will hope his selection contains no mistakes, unlike his decision to launch a player ratings website yesterday before an embarrassing climb down.
You decided to postpone that. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think this is a press conference for the 30 players that I choose.
Capello will now want to move on from an uncharacteristic error of judgment. Next week he takes his players to Austria for altitude training as England put the finishing touches to their World Cup preparations. Dan Rowan, BBC News at Wembley.
Now, it's been distinctly chilly of late. Let's take a look at the weather with Helen Willits. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Fiona. Would you believe we've had a few flakes of snow in Newcastle today? That's how cold it is. Now, those showers will continue through this evening and overnight before they gradually fade away. Still the risk of some snowfall, potentially for the Pennines and the Highlands and Grampians. But then the big story then overnight is the extent of the frost. Just like last night in the north, temperatures down to freezing in the towns and cities. Even in rural parts further south, we're expecting a frost, so a damaging frost, given that it's the middle of May. What should we normally expect? Well, temperatures of 6 or 7 degrees, so it is well below par at the moment. In fact, some places have struggled to reach those temperatures by day in the last couple of days. Now, it will be quite a sunny start given the cold night, but soon the shower cloud will develop. So let's give a bit more detail for tomorrow. Northern Ireland actually look as if they'll see fewer showers and more sunshine. So too the north and west of Scotland. I think further east and south across Scotland, more showers still potential. However, with some sunshine and light winds, I think it will actually feel quite pleasant. The May sunshine is actually quite strong despite the low temperatures. Hopefully some showers around across northern England, probably fewer than today, so some sunshine around the coasts as well. That might be a change after today. Probably, though, more showers across the southeast of England than we've had today, and more for southern coastal counties. But the north coast of Devon and Cornwall might see more sunshine, so too the Cardigan Bay coast of Wales. But it's basically a showery picture, well, hoping that we'll see that sunshine, though, between those showers, which will fade again tomorrow night, cold night again. But then for Scotland and Northern Ireland, after seeing more sunshine tomorrow, we get the weather system coming in for Thursday. So it's cloudier with some rain around and a few showers popping up elsewhere. Again, temperatures, nothing special, 11 to 14. We might creep up to 16 in London with some sunshine on Friday, but there'll be a scattering of showers elsewhere. So yes, it stays chilly by day and by night. Now I'll hand you over to George.
Helen, thank you very much. Welcome back to Downing Street, where tonight we've heard that Gordon Brown is preparing to resign. Let's get a final word now from our political editor, Nick Robbins. So, is this the end of the new Labour project, Nick?
It's the end of an era, yes. It is 13 years, not just the end for Gordon Brown of almost 3 years as Prime Minister, but 13 years here on Downing Street. And it's very striking that the people that created that so-called political project are the ones who are around him now. And he took that phone call from Tony Blair. He's with Alistair Campbell, he's with Peter Mandelson, he's with his old friend Ed Balls, and with Douglas Alexander as well. And I'm told from inside there that after the mood of sadness, they're now beginning to tell jokes, probably at our expense, I suspect, George. They know we're all waiting here for something to happen, but I'm hearing they will not announce the Prime Minister's resignation. He will not go to the palace until the deal that the Tories can or can't do with Nick Clegg is clear, which may mean, therefore, that he can't go to the palace until quite late this evening.
Right. Now, we know who is coming in. Do we know what kind of government it's going to be?
Well, no, we only know that David Cameron will be leading it, but we simply don't know the measure of the government. Now, its policies now, which have been renegotiated with the Liberal Democrats, are being done as we speak. Who will fill which posts, other than many Liberal Democrats will be there as well as Conservatives? That we are waiting to see, and it's going to be a fascinating shape, because one Tory told me, you know what, we're rather pleased to be doing this, because we're able to get rid of some of the policy we didn't like and use the Liberal Democrats as an excuse.
All right, Nick, thank you very much. So another extraordinary day of hard bargaining here. All the signs are that the era of New Labour is over. There's continuing coverage of all the latest political moves and all the drama at Westminster through the evening on the BBC's News Channel. But that's all from Downing Street from us. Now it's time to join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.